pleasure to have you here at CEO Zones. As you know, we're trying to help speakers like yourself who talk to clients like AWS, the Amazon family, Nike, some of the people you've interviewed on your podcast. You have the top 1% global podcast, married to Jen with 7 children, have a book out, You Are Enough. And I forgot to ask you this back when we talked the last time, but I think your second book is due like any minute, I'll say. Now that's putting you on the spot, so I'll let you respond to that one right there. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to have the conversation today and for allowing me to be a part of the community with you. The second book, like the first, took longer or is taking longer than anticipated. What I didn't see happening with the first book, and a number of people said it to me, and I thought, no, that's not going to work out the same way it does for you, is the keynote, the speaking business, the motivational speaking business takes off when you have a larger business card, which is that book. So I've done more speaking in the last 12 months than I've done writing, but we are on our way. We're working on it, which is a start at best.
So that kind of gets me to, you shared publicly you had a goal to have 20 keynotes this year, and if you achieve that, or as you achieve that, your wife would allow you to buy, and I might have this part wrong because I'm an old man memory, but a sport coat and matching tennis shoes, and I'll call them tennis shoes. Maybe yours are more professional, but how's that goal coming, and did I mess up the goal?
No, the goal was right. So Nike Blazers and a new blazer. And it's funny that you ask, because not even a week ago, my wife looked at me, she goes, do you really need a new pair of shoes and a new sports jacket for every keynote? And I said, well, no, but we did kind of agree to it. So we're well on our way to 20. We should hit our goal this year, and that's been really fun.
Excellent.
I've met people I never would have expected, built relationships with people that I otherwise wouldn't have. And again, we're on our way. We're doing what we set out to do.
Okay. I'm very glad that you're doing that, because back in April, that's early on. Those of us that were with public companies, the world centers around 13 weeks. So back in April, that's pretty far from now being almost the middle of September. So excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And I would be honored to help you if I could, if you start to get to 19 and something happens. We'll figure something out. So Eric, one of the questions around the keynotes, you have a list of topics, but vulnerability begets vulnerability. How did you get to that point where you knew you wanted to speak about it, the title of it, and just kind of give us the backstory? And then if you don't mind, because it's called Meet the Speaker, give us a quick overview so that maybe somebody would want to hire you to learn more.
Yeah, so there's a handful of things that I talk about, leadership and culture being one of them, relationship capital, which we can certainly talk about even as a part of this. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. But the reality of it is as a family, I don't want to give it away, it's in the book, it's also in the keynote, but as a family, we went through some pretty trying times. In fact, we've been going through this now for 7 years. And for the first 4 years, we decided not to tell anybody. It was sort of our deep, dark secret. You would ask questions. I would sort of, in an effort to be honest, but not too forthright, I would avoid the answer. I'd be very political in my response. I'd give you something that would sort of turn us into a different conversation. And then one day someone asked me a very pointed question, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And I let the cat out of the bag. And I shared something that I thought was very vulnerable. I shared something that I thought was going to lead this person to judge me. And what I quickly realized is they were going through their version of the same thing and had never shared it with anybody. And I remember leaving that afternoon kind of thinking, I wonder if I'm not alone and he's going through this, I wonder if other people are as well. So I slowly started sharing this vulnerable family secret, for lack of a better term. And what I realized was this was a societal norm that nobody talks about. So then I made a conscious decision to be more present to the people at bagging my groceries at Target or the barista at Starbucks. And you know what, Bill? They're all going through stuff too. So then I put this trusty device down for a few weeks. I'd leave it in my office in the basement and I'd go upstairs. And my kids were going through stuff that they wouldn't share if I wasn't present. That coworkers, everyone around us is going through something. Buying a house or selling a house, becoming pregnant, having a miscarriage, getting a diagnosis, burying a loved one. Some of these can be very exciting times. Some of them can be very sad. But because we're so present to scrolling Instagram, updating LinkedIn, checking that email, we miss the moment to ask the barista, hey, how are you today? Or the person behind us at the restaurant, hey, how's the day going? Simply holding the door. But this idea, vulnerability begets vulnerability, is the moment you open the door, just a little bit, others will do the same. And it's fascinating. The data, Gallup did a research study a few years back that talks about the data. Your employees will stay longer. Your employees will work harder. Your employees are much like 3.8% more likely to tell people this is where you want to work, all because you got a little real with the people around you.
I appreciate that. And those that follow your podcasts, I believe it's your friend Jake, you and he got into that fairly deeply.
Yeah.
I guess you have two friends, Jake, as I listened to that, because one Jake and the other Jake, but your two friends, Jake. You touched on it, and I'd like to have kind of the same kind of structured answer around relationship capital and the value of meaningful connections, because you and I met through some meaningful connections. And our other content partners, out of the 30-some, most of them I've known 15 years plus, and you and I just recently met, and we kind of, at least in my opinion, we clicked immediately.
Yes.
I think it's your glasses that got me, because I like that little bit of
I'll
orange
take
and you
it.
like a lot of blue. But anyway, relationship capital. Give us a synopsis there, please.
Yeah, I read something about a year ago, and I probably shared this with you, so I won't ask you the question directly. But I heard a statistic about a year ago that was my kids range in age from 23 to 5. We look our kids in the eyes an average of 30 seconds a day. We are not present. We're not present at work. We're not present on Zoom calls. We're not present on team calls. We're not present in the day-to-day. Meanwhile, Bill, if you report to me, my big focus on our weekly one-on-one is that TPS report. You need to turn in that report. It's due every Friday. But we don't have a personal conversation. We have a business conversation. And some of the same Gallup statistics that we referenced when talking about vulnerability lend themselves equally as relevant around relationship capital. The call forward there is to get to know your people for people and not human doings, as my friend Davin would say. Get to know them as human beings, not human doings. Yes, the TPS report has to be done. Yes, quota needs to be made. But hey, man, you look a little off today. Is everything okay? Is there anything you need? What if just once a month, our weekly one-on-ones were courtesy of Uber Eats? Maybe I send you a $50 Uber Eats gift card, and we don't have a business conversation. We just have the, hey, how are things going? I bought you lunch. We're a little bit more relaxed. If we work in the same town, maybe we meet for lunch. Maybe it's just a cup of coffee. But this idea of building relationship capital with one another allows us to celebrate the wins, the new homes, the pregnancies, and all that. But it also allows us to mourn the losses. And again, it goes back to everyone's going through something. And in the workplace, we're so much more focused on the doing, the projects, the tasks, the KPIs, the OKRs, than we are the actual people. And if we invest in the people around us, our kids, as well as our spouses, as well as the people that we work with, listen, if I know that you like your coffee, black with a little bit of skim milk or almond milk, and I bring you one of those to the office, it costs me $5. I do it once a month. I put that note in my phone so I know when I'm at Starbucks or Caribou or Pete's or whatever, I know, oh yeah, this is when I get Bill a cup of coffee. I even put it in my calendar to get you a cup of coffee. You don't need to know any of that, but I'm building meaningful relationship capital with you every time I bring you that cup of coffee. Every time I ask, hey, did you get the painting done in the living room, I think, this weekend, right, Bill? Did you get that done over the weekend? I'm building relationship capital. And the value in that is that we get more vulnerable. And when things are going a little awry, you're not hitting your quota. You didn't turn in the report. That allows me the opportunity to have the tough conversation. Think of building relationship capital as deposits in an account. I can withdraw them, but I can't withdraw them until I have put them in the account.
Exactly. So you made me think a couple things there. So care of the people, back at Chick-fil-A, they're kind of known for it's my pleasure. But Truett Cathy, the founder, back in the days of typewritered memos, pre-email, he would encourage you at the beginning of the memo, and it would come in the mail. The memo would be encouraging, something that I believe you ought to improve on, and then he would not say regards or best regards. He would say, take care of each other. Take care. So people know that it's their pleasure at Chick-fil-A, but that's one of those inside tips I'll give you there. So that was good. You mentioned Caribou and Pete's, so I forgot to mention to everybody that you're based in St. Paul, Minnesota, and as soon as you said Caribou and Pete's, since they were former clients of mine, I kind of know where they used to be, so before they were purchased up. So thank you for that. The care piece, I think you got into, and again, I read some transcripts. I've never been in the audience when you've been there, but the leadership is a choice, culture is contagious. That keynote that you give, can you give us a little snippet of that, since we're here to try to have CEOs want to hire you. That's the purpose of our day here.
Let's take a step back for a second.
Sure.
To relationship capital. You brought up Truett Cathy, and it made me think of a gentleman by the name of Doug Conant. He's an author. He's a successful business. He ran as the CEO Campbell Soup for about 10 years. Actually, a neighbor friend of mine was the CFO at a division of Campbell Soup, and they know each other. But when Doug came on the podcast, when I was doing my research to have him on my show, what I realized is when he left after his 10 years at Campbell Soup, he had written 20, I might be a little bit off, but I think it was 20,000 thank you cards to the employees at Campbell Soup. 20,000 thank you cards in 10 years. Now, the interesting thing is that they only averaged about 15,000 employees while he was there. He made it a point 60 to 90 minutes a day in a commute to and from work to write thank you cards. Those little things, I write this in the book, you've read the book. They say the little things mean a lot. The little things don't mean a lot. The little things mean absolutely everything. And the thesis, to answer your question, leadership is a choice, culture is contagious. Many of us are employees, few of us are employers. The large majority of us that go to work wait for, quote unquote, the leadership team to lead, the leadership team to build and create the culture of an organization. And I would argue it's all of our responsibilities. It's incumbent upon every single one of us, from the CEO to the janitor, to build and maintain a positive culture within the office, to build and maintain the right type of leadership in the office. Because if the custodian's coming in every day taking out the trash and doing the little things, the CEO, the VPs, the executives, they're all going to start to see that, and they're going to change their behavior. I'm reminded of a company I did a consulting project for about a year ago on just this topic, and we pulled up into the parking lot. We pulled right in. I'm 30 minutes in the car with this CEO, and I looked at him and I said, "Hey, I don't have the relationship capital to say what I'm about to say, but the reserved for the CEO and the reserved for the COO signs have to come down." And he looked at me like I was nuts. I said, "If those parking spots are reserved for you, the sentiment is that you are better than me. So much so that you get your own spot." And he looked at me. Listen, they paid me a lot of money to come in and consult for about a year. And that was sort of my first thought was, you should take these down. So they took them down. And within 2 days, I said, "Now what I want you to do is go park somewhere else. Let people know that those spots right up at the front are now open and available to all." Within 2 days, 3 or 4 people had said something. "Hey, why'd you take the signs down?" "Well, I realized I don't need a spot. Nobody else gets a spot." And so it's those little things that we do in the office, good or bad, that build the culture for the business.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So we have an acquaintance, but I'm going to pick on Davin's organization a minute and let you tell us, because it's always better to hear from a third party, Purpose Summit. And Davin, I believe you've known him for years. I also just got to know him. So what's Purpose Summit to you, and how can we help Davin together, maybe?
Yeah, the Purpose Summit is phenomenal. So I got to know Davin. You talked about the power of LinkedIn earlier in the conversation. I met Davin through LinkedIn. I was considered a speaker. I actually hosted 3 or 4 episodes of my podcast at the Purpose Summit now 2 years ago at Notre Dame. But what this summit is it's bringing business leaders and executives from all over the world to one single location for a summit, 3 or 4 days long. This year it was in Charlotte. Next year it will be in Charlotte. But they're bringing top-notch speakers from around the world to help us build better practices, to help us care better for the people around us. Past guests, Gary Ridge, also a friend, has built an incredible business over the years, was the CEO at WD-40 for, I think, 25 years. Seems like a silly story to build a business up like WD-40, but he built a hell of a practice on the backs of caring well for his people. The infamous author John Gordon comes to mind. Nick Vujicic, who many of you know was born with no arms and no legs. These keynote speakers are some of the best in the world. But so's Davin. So's everybody that gets on stage during that summit. And it's really game-changing because it's not just a 3 or 4 day summit. Much like my keynote, it's a presentation followed with, here are the practical ways in which you can change things in your office, in your home. And then there's follow-up. He has built an incredible community inside of the summit. So when you go home, when you get back to the office, you're a part of a broader community that's trying to do the same thing that you are.
Okay. Take a good swallow there. Maybe it's caribou.
It is not. I wish it was.
Okay. So one of my favorite questions is trying to learn who might have been a role model or a mentor to you, now that you are to many others. So thoughts there?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I would say I've had a number of people over the years. I think of a gentleman by the name of Keith Hatley, who is someone that was in the tech space at the same time as I was really starting my career. But there's a number of people that I look up to. There's folks at church, there's folks in the speaking community. I'm very fond of a couple individuals in the speaking community, Andy Andrews, Sylvie DeGiusto, and so many others that Liz Wiseman comes to mind. People that took me under their wing at a time where I really needed it to get myself from one step to the next. I was writing a book and I reached out to one of my mentors from afar and said, I'd really love to come and spend a day in your office and just learn how to write a book. You've written 30, I haven't written one. You've done 1 million keynotes, I haven't done one. And to my surprise, he said, yes, I flew out there. And I said, how often do you get this question? He said, every day. Multiple requests a day. I said, how many times have you done this? He said, Eric, we've never done this before. So I've had a series of people that have been willing to give their time and their energy and invest in me. Scott McCain comes to mind. People that have given me helpful tips along the way to get me to that next level. They have no skin in the game. They don't make money if I make money. They don't profit from my book, but they want to see good put out into the world, and they have believed in me. And I'm really honored at some of the people, some of the names of the people even that backed the book. Waldo Waldman, Andy Andrews, John O'Leary. These people had no reason to endorse my book, but they read the book, they took the time, they endorsed the book. So I'm grateful for the community and for so many people that, again, owed me nothing, but were willing to give me their yes, and I'm grateful for that.
Okay. So when you start your podcast, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time, you ask the guest, so I'm going to ask you your favorite question because you never get to answer your own favorite question. What are you grateful for today?
You know, it's funny. Someone put me on the spot in an episode recently, and in fact, I was thinking of this about an hour ago, so good timing. Nobody ever asks me my own questions. I would say I'm grateful for, I'll lean back into the last question. I'm really grateful for people over the years that have invested in me for no reason. They've believed in me. In particular, I'm really grateful for the people that saw more in me than I saw in myself. I would lean in and I would say my parents saw more in me than I saw in myself at a young age. My wife saw more in me. Anybody that's ever promoted me in a role when I was an employee, that gave me that shot from individual contributor to director or VP or C level, I'm just really grateful because I took those opportunities very seriously. Jake Brown is another one of those that has given me time and had no real reason to do so. And I'm so great. I'm happy where I'm at in life right now, personally and professionally, but I'm grateful for the people that saw what they did in me and gave me the opportunity.
Okay. So you answered your own question pretty well there.
Did I pass?
I don't know if I picked this up in a podcast or when I was reading your book. I don't know if we talked about this. I know we haven't since I got back. But I put my wife, daughter, two of our youngest grandkids, 16 and 15 at the time. Now everybody's 16 and older, and my grandkids. But we did 14 national parks, 9 state parks, and I'm reading your book as I'm enjoying that family and those weeks. Actually, it's a couple months together. And it was painful for you to share what you shared and me to enjoy what I was enjoying. But you've used that to help others. So I just wanted to say thank you from my heart. And I know some people say that, but couple nights at the campfire, I had to cry for you and with you. So,
You know, it's interesting. I don't know that I knew what I was doing. Thank you for that. I don't know that I knew what I was doing when I wrote the book and the doors that I was opening, but what it has done, vulnerability begets vulnerability. I got real, I got raw in the book, and I've had hundreds of people reach out and share their version of one of the stories in the book. And many of them start, I haven't shared this in 20 years, or I just got a card the other day, it's upstairs, from someone who didn't speak to their dad for 20 years and didn't reconnect until he was on his deathbed. And it's comforting to me knowing that I'm not alone, but I think it's also been comforting to others. So I appreciate the kind words.
Well, you earned them, and you're earning them. The other part about the book that struck me, you used the phrase 70 times 7, and that was one of my grandfather's favorite statements, and from Genesis, and forgiven so many times that you just don't count them anymore. And you use that I think you use that right up front as your thank you to your family and some of the people. So that kind of got me. I don't know if that's part of the divine nature of the pages some people don't read, but that kind of made me go, okay, Grandpa, I want to read this. We're going to go this together. And the other thing that I liked about the book, at the end of each chapter, you kind of gave a Q&A, and Mark Madison, another one of our content partners, he writes, I think he's written about 12 books now, maybe more, and every chapter he ends with, this is what I want you to learn, this is what I want you to know, and don't go on until you think you got this type. Now, he's funny about it, but that's really his tone if he were here. So how did you come up with that concept, and how did you think about, I guess you think about that as an author. I've never written a book, but is that part of your objective as you're writing the chapter, or does that come after?
Great question. So I'm a terrible writer, and I wrote my first book and I sent it out to beta readers, meaning let's call it 20 people in my circle, some of whom know the stories, some of whom don't, and I wanted them to fill in the gaps, tell me what was wrong. A very good friend whom I owe a phone call to, Josh Wymore, that you'll see at the Purpose Summit. Josh called me as one of my volunteer beta readers and said, Eric, Chapter 6 is your first chapter. And I thought, oh, you're Josh, this is not what are you talking about? He said, that's the hook that draws people in. Eric, I read the whole book out of a commitment to you, but I had to push through the first 5 chapters. But if you move chapter 6 to chapter 1 and you start the book with those words, now I want to read the book. And after Josh and I spoke, and I took that into consideration, and I'm shuffling the book around to make it what it now is today, I got a couple of questions from some of the beta readers. Hey, what's the purpose? What's the message you're really fundamentally trying to get across? And it was one chapter, if I remember. There was a pretty consistent theme that people are like, okay, I get it, I see value, but what's the message? And then I thought, well, I'm going to tell you the message in the form of a couple of questions. And then that's when I realized, Bill, you're going to read the book different than April is going to read the book. And you're going to come up with your own thesis and your own takeaways and your own version of probably the same story. Mm-hmm. But if I could direct you just a little bit to think about things that otherwise you might not, and that's really where this came from. It became, I don't want to say a workbook, but in the back of each chapter, there's things to think about, that's things right. to really process. And I think if I went back and rewrote the book, the questions would be different now almost a year later.
Well, I actually made a note. I have the book over my right shoulder so other people could see the cover and make sure they go to your website or Amazon or even CEO Zones to get the book. But I took a couple notes and copied them down just so I would have them right here in front of me. and it also seems to bring together part of the fun that you like to have. So anyway, I'll leave some of that to people that want to read the book. But I don't know if I read this, I listened to this, I watched this, because you not only have the Top 1% podcast yourself, but then you're guests on so many different other people's, like you are today, YouTubes and podcasts. But somewhere along the line, your brother came up and how you were different, and you, I wouldn't put it as, I struggled in school, and when I got to 6th grade, I figured that's all I needed to know. I never went to college, but oddly enough, the next 35 years, I wanted MBAs or I wouldn't hire them, right? So due to the way we did business. Prior to my retirement, that's kind of a twist, I guess. I didn't know what it meant, but I certainly wanted them around me. But back to the fun, you also do emceeing for fundraisers and events and things like that. How did you, I guess you were about 11, and I'll let you tell the story, 11 or 12 as the story goes. So how did that all start for you?
So, the MC thing's a little funny. I was young, and I got pushed on stage. My dad was a volunteer. He was a semi-professional cyclist when I was a kid. So it was like weekends. He'd go ride 50 miles on a bike, 60 miles on a bike. His big one was a 252 miler that he did a few times over the years. He did a 24-hour ride, but it was it was often tied to the same organization. So I went and volunteered for like a 110-mile bike ride. I was I was 12. I was probably gonna pick up trash and keep the community clean with all the riders. There were about 1,500 riders, which meant about 5,000 people waiting at the start-finish line. And then the founder, a guy named Richard DeBernardis, came up to me and he goes, "Eric, our DJ didn't show up today." I'm like 12 years old. Okay, sorry. And he goes, "Would you mind emceeing the day?" And there was a workbook, and it was pretty easy. But as my dad always lovingly jokes, "Eric, you've got a face for radio." So over the years, I had a ton of fun at that particular event, which was called El Tour de Phoenix. And I've done more and more of it over the years. And it's actually, I find it almost more difficult to be the MC than get up and give a keynote. Because there's moments where things don't go as planned. There's moments where half the audience decides to leave to go to the bathroom in between set changes or in between speakers. And you, as the MC, have to tell jokes. You've got to think on the fly. I remember I was the MC of an event a couple years ago, and this young lady walks up to give her speech after I introduce her. Things were going swimmingly until she got on stage and realized she had no idea where her speech was. So I've got to fill the gaps, help her find her speech, kind of navigate some chaos. But the MC thing's a lot of fun for me because these audiences can be 100 people at a sales kickoff, 50 people at a sales kickoff, up to one I did a couple years ago that comes to mind. That particular event was about 1,200 people. And it's a fun opportunity to test your wit and test your abilities to think on the fly. But I love the MCs, the MC gigs.
Well, you're the only speaker. I did about midnight last night. I'm ripping through everybody's website. You're the only one that advertises you do that. Now, I'm sure there's some that do it, but you actually say, "Hey, I want to do this. I like to do this." Yeah. So we skimmed over some of your family, but your brother and you were very different in school, as I heard this story. Do you care to share just briefly how that goes? Yeah.
Yeah. So I should say my brother's got what I lovingly refer to as a real job. I get to get on stage and share my story, my book, and some of these topics that we talked about. My brother is the general counsel for the FBI. He runs the legal department for the FBI, and I asked him at one point, I think there's a few hundred attorneys that fall under his purview. But he learned at a young age how to study. I wouldn't say that he struggled in school per se, but it didn't come very naturally to him. For him to get A's and B's, he had to put his head down, read, study, and be very mindful. For me, I got A's and B's and the occasional C. I sometimes didn't even do my homework because I would look at the syllabus at the beginning of the semester. Sorry, Mrs. Davis. I would look at the syllabus at the beginning of the semester and realize, well, I don't need to do the homework to still get an A or a B. And so I'd play the long game. Stuff came very natural to me. I remember the information that went in. It sort of stayed in. It went out as I didn't need it any longer. But I will say for myself, I had to learn in adulthood how to study. I had to learn how to learn, which was very challenging for me. Whereas my brother, I think the success that he's had is he had big goals, big objectives. I don't know that they were quite this big, but he knew how to learn. He knew how to study. He knew how to do really hard things or things that were very difficult for me. But it's funny you bring up my brother, because when you're writing a book, the acknowledgments, the things that are often glossed over, like you said, I forgot my brother. I love my brother dearly. I went through this book with a fine-tooth comb. Nobody's called me and said, hey, you missed a period, or there's a comma where there should be a period. I'm sure there's grammatical errors. There is in every book. But I missed my brother, whom I love dearly, and I regret. There are other people that I'm surprised I remembered, and somehow I missed him in the acknowledgments. So, Brad, there you go.
So his name's Brad. Brad, we'll send you a copy.
There you go.
So when you're looking to develop your personal growth, are there certain authors you like, certain people that come to mind you like to read or listen to, or you just don't have time right now? Because everybody has a different season of life, right? So
we're 150 episodes into my podcast, which means I would say nearly every guest has at least one book written. Some of them have 2, some of them have 30.
Yeah.
I try and read a book or 2 before we host the podcast. The thing I was really profoundly grateful for is I interviewed a gentleman early on named Ryan Leake. He wrote a book called Chasing Failure, a brilliant read, an absolutely brilliant read, and a great keynote speaker. The second time I had him on the show, I asked him that question, what's one thing that you're grateful for today? And he paused, and I had heard it before, but not in these words. He said, Eric, I am grateful that you read my book. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, Eric, I've done a lot of podcasts over the years. I do a lot of podcasts each month. It's clear to me who reads and doesn't read my book, and you read it from cover to cover, and you prepared. And so I have found a lot of my guests through referrals. You know, you have someone like John O'Leary on the show, and he introduces you to Andre Norman and Andy Andrews, and you pick up the book and you start reading. Ryan Leake's a great example. I found his book at Target. I was really intrigued. I bought the book, I read the book, and I wanted to have him on the show. I am professionally persistent about getting people on the show, but I would say the large majority of the books that I read are found on LinkedIn or at a bookstore. I just read this book that I'm going to grab called It All Makes Sense Now. Embrace your ADHD brain to live a creative and colorful life. This is a really great story. I dated her in high school. We're connected on social media, and I don't know, we've probably been connected for 10 years. She's married. She's got kids. I'm married. I've got kids. It's just 2 old high school friends that reconnected, and she wrote a book that intrigued me, so I picked it up. She was kind enough to send it to me. She came on the podcast. And so I love sort of that self-improvement category, either in the business world or in the personal world.
Okay. So I make the assumption, and I want to be very careful to make sure I'm accurate, that ericbrooker.com is everything about you. You can get to your podcast, you can get to your LinkedIn profile, Eric Brooker on LinkedIn, Counsel Culture on LinkedIn. Everything is there on your website, but then you can go to LinkedIn and branch out to your, what I'll call company, even though it's not your company. But, yeah, your other platform, maybe we'll say. Anything else you'd like to add? Because we want CEOs to hire you to be a speaker. That's my goal.
I will. I imagine my contact information will be in the show notes.
Yes.
What I'd love to do is I would love to offer the first 5 executives that reach out to me via LinkedIn. Tell me that you found me via this conversation, and I will ship the first 5 people to reach out a copy of the book. It is well thought out. It took me far longer to write than it should have, but I think what it does is it opens the doors to understanding the importance of building relationship capital with your people, with the people at Target, with the people at Starbucks or Caribou, as well as this concept, this thesis that vulnerability begets vulnerability, and the impact it can have when you get real. You don't have to get super real. You just have to even scratch the surface on vulnerability as an executive.
Right. Thank you for that. Our audience would greatly appreciate that, and I can highly recommend the book. And I had 3 of like the jacket page. That's where I keep my notes in the book, so when I reread them, I can kind of say, "Oh, I don't want to miss that this time," or "I want to think about that this time." So, thank you so much, Eric, for being our guest today. And I truly hope that you get sport coat and sneakers, and make your wife maybe you get to 22, 23.
As my dad would say, from your lips to God's ears. But no, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Take care.